Why do you want the person you want, even when it hurts? Why does your heart race for one specific face, one specific voice, one presence that feels almost fated, while others, kind, stable, loving, leave you untouched? You tell yourself it's chemistry, destiny, the universe, something cosmic pulling you closer. But the truth is quieter and far more haunting. Attraction is memory, a recognition, a returning. Think of the one person you could not forget, not because they treated you well, not because they stayed, but because something in them felt familiar in a way you couldn't explain. You didn't just meet them, you remembered them, or rather, your nervous system did. The way they spoke, the way they hesitated, the way they gave and withheld affection in a pattern so subtle you couldn't see it, it matched something ancient inside you. Something from long before adulthood taught you to pretend that love could be chosen logically. You think you are drawn to someone because of who they are now, but attraction is not a decision of the mind, it is a recognition in the body. The heart remembers what the mind has forgotten, and the body seeks what it knows, even when what it knows has been painful. There is a quiet moment, often late at night, when the world is still and your thoughts drift back to the one who lingered in your life like a ghost. And you wonder why. Why them? Why that connection? Why the ache that feels like longing and loss at the same time? You might call it love, but psychologists call it imprinting an emotional blueprint formed in the earliest years of your life. The blueprint of what it felt like to be seen or ignored, held or neglected, safe or uncertain. Attraction is not about the best person, not the safest, not the kindest. Attraction is the pull toward what feels emotionally familiar, even if what feels familiar once hurt you. You don't fall in love with a person, you fall in love with the emotional pattern they mirror back to you, the rhythm of affection and distance, warmth and coldness, presence and disappearance that shaped your first experience of love. And that pattern did not begin in adulthood. It began in a small, quiet room, somewhere in the earliest chapters of your life, when you first learned what love felt like and what you had to do to receive it. Now we return to that beginning, to the child who learned how to love. Have you ever wondered why certain people feel like home, even before you truly know them? It begins long before adulthood, long before romance, long before you ever learn the language of desire. It begins in childhood, in quiet rooms, in familiar voices, in the way love was given or withheld when you were still too small to understand what was happening. Picture a child sitting at the edge of a doorway. They are waiting not for toys or praise or adventure, but for something far more delicate: attention. A glance, a warm voice, a sign that they matter. The child doesn't know how to name the ache in their chest. They only feel it. The way time stretches when a parent is distant. The way their body brightens when someone finally turns toward them. This rhythm becomes the first definition of love. Not words, not theory, but chemistry, nervous system, breath. Psychologists call this emotional imprinting. The nervous system records experiences in patterns, not sentences. If love felt like warmth, followed by distance, then unpredictability becomes familiar. If affection always came with a condition, be quiet, be good, don't need too much, then you learn to earn love rather than rest in it. If closeness was inconsistent, then longing becomes your native emotional language. This is where familiar pain begins. You don't choose what feels familiar, your body does. The heart recognizes patterns the mind no longer remembers, so the child grows, carrying an invisible script. This is what closeness feels like. This is what I must tolerate to be loved. The script becomes instinct. You begin to crave what matches the emotional texture of your first attachments. even if those attachments were uneven, cold, or confusing. And because you were so young, you didn't question it. You just adapted. You learned to chase, to soothe, to apologize, to shrink yourself, to hold your breath emotionally, all to keep love from leaving. You might think you outgrew that, but childhood never disappears. It becomes the lens through which you recognize connection in adulthood. So, when you meet someone whose presence awakens that old emotional rhythm, the familiar tension, the familiar longing, the familiar ache your body whispers, this feels like home. Not because it is good, but because it is known. The child in you is still reaching across the years, trying to complete a story that began long ago. And without realizing it, you will search for this emotional pattern again, not because it is healing, but because it is remembered. The child grows and the script follows. Now we see how it appears when you become an adult. You like to believe you choose the people you love. You tell yourself it's about their personality, their kindness, their humor, their values, as if attraction were a rational act. But when you look closely, when you trace the pattern of your desires, you notice something unsettling. The people you fall hardest for tend to resemble something you've known before, not in looks, not in words, but in emotional atmosphere. You meet someone new. At first, they feel different, fresh, a new beginning. You feel drawn to them in a way you can't explain. The connection is instant, electric, magnetic. You tell your friends, "I don't know why, but it just feels right." And that feeling, that pull, is not random. It is recognition. The nervous system whispering, "I remember this." What you call chemistry is often your subconscious, identifying familiar emotional patterns. If love once felt like chasing, then you are drawn to the one who runs. If love once felt like earning attention, you are drawn to the one who withholds it. If love once felt unpredictable, you are drawn to the one who confuses you. And the mind will create stories to justify it. This is passion, this is fate, this is real. But the truth is quieter, heavier. You're not drawn to the best person. You're drawn to the familiar one. This is where the mask appears. On the surface, the person looks new, different face, different voice, different life. But underneath, the emotional script is the same as the one you learned long ago. You pursue people who feel just out of reach, because your heart was trained to believe that love is something that must be chased. You stay when you should walk away, because the longing feels like home. You confuse intensity for intimacy. You mistake anxiety for excitement. You may find yourself replaying scenes you swore you'd never repeat, waiting for a text that doesn't come, explaining your worth to someone who should already see it, believing if you just love a little harder, they will finally love you back. The pain feels personal, but it is historical. It belongs to the child who learned that love was something uncertain, and yet the pull feels like destiny. The wrong person can feel like the only person, not because the connection is deeper, but because the emotional pattern is older. There are reasons for this, psychological ones, biological ones. Your brain and your nervous system are not choosing love freely. They are repeating what they know. And to understand why the familiar feels so irresistible, we have to look at the science beneath attraction. Why does your heart speed up around one person and remain still around another? Why can one touch feel electric while another feels hollow? It's easy to believe attraction lives in the mind, in preference, in taste, in conscious choice. But attraction happens much deeper, in the silent language of your nervous system. The body recognizes before the mind understands. Psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth called this attachment imprinting the emotional blueprint of how you learned to receive love. If you grew up with steady, consistent affection, your nervous system learned safety. This is a secure attachment. But if love was unpredictable, distant, or conditional, you may have learned to chase, to cling, or to avoid. And as an adult, your attraction follows that same pattern, searching not for happiness, but for familiarity. Your brain plays a role too. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of desire and anticipation, doesn't reward you for receiving love. It rewards you for seeking it. The tension, the distance, the almost but not quite closeness floods your system more intensely than peace ever could. This is why the person who texts you sometimes, disappears sometimes, and returns just. When you start to walk away, can feel impossible to forget. The cycle of unpredictability becomes addictive, a psychological slot machine where the next emotional reward might be just one moment away. Neuroscientists call this intermittent reinforcement. The less predictable the affection, the stronger the attachment. Your brain lights up not when love is present, but when it might be, so you learn to wait, to hope, to imagine, and the longing becomes part of the connection itself. Then there is something deeper still, limbic resonance, the way nervous systems mirror each other. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory explains that your body is constantly scanning others, asking, "Are you safe? Are you familiar? Do you match what I know love to feel like?" And when it finds someone who carries the emotional frequency you learned in childhood, whether warm or wounding, your heart moves toward them automatically. You feel drawn, not by logic, but by recognition. So when you say, "I don't know why I can't let them go," the truth may be, your nervous system isn't attracted to the person, it's attracted to the pattern. But there is something darker hidden inside this design, because the familiar is not always kind. The remembered is not always healing. And sometimes the person who feels like destiny is actually the echo of an old wound calling your name again. And where there is attraction, there is often shadow. What if the person you're in love with is not really them, but a memory wearing a new face? What if the pull you feel, the ache that won't let you sleep, is not romance but reenactment? The heart has a way of mistaking the familiar for the necessary. And so you find yourself drawn to those who hurt you, confuse you, or keep you half-fed on affection, as if your soul is trying to finish a story it never got closure from. Imagine this. You meet someone who gives you just enough warmth to keep you near, but never enough to feel secure. They step close, then fade away. They let you hold them, but never fully know them. And even though part of you knows this isn't love, you stay. You wait, you hope, you try to prove yourself, to earn what should have been given freely. And every time they return after disappearing, your chest lights up like a flare in the dark. The nervous system calls this relief. The heart calls it longing. But the truth is, this is your past replaying itself in real time. Psychologists call this trauma reenactment, the unconscious drive to recreate the emotional wounds of childhood in an attempt to finally resolve them. But instead of resolution, you lose yourself. You dim your voice. You shrink your needs. You learn to bleed quietly. You become a shadow of your own joy. And the pull toward this person feels supernatural, magnetic, inevitable. Not because they are your soulmate, but because your nervous system recognizes the emotional landscape of inconsistency. You mistake anxiety for passion, absence for depth, and waiting for love feels like proof of how badly you want it. You chase ghosts wearing human faces, trying to heal a wound that the original source never corrected, so you crave closeness, but choose distance. You long to be seen, but attach yourself to those who look through you. You want to be held, but end up holding yourself through nights of silent tears. There is a monster within this cycle, the belief that if you can just get this person to love you, you will finally be whole. But this is not your failure. This is the blueprint you inherited. A culture that teaches you that love must be dramatic, to be meaningful, that heartbreak is proof of depth, that the more it hurts, the more real it must be. And now, we must turn to the world around you, the stage that encourages this pain and calls it love. When did love become something you had to survive, rather than something you were allowed to rest in? Look at the stories you were raised on, The movies, the songs, the dramas that shaped the way you imagined romance. They taught you that the greatest love is the one that hurts. That longing is proof of depth. That chase is proof of desire. That heartbreak is somehow poetic. And so you learned that stability is boring and peace is unimpressive. You began to crave the chaos because culture told you chaos is passion. Hollywood never shows the quiet forms of love, the gentle consistency, the simple presence of someone who stays. Instead, it shows the kind of love that is loud, unstable, fiery, almost violent in its intensity. Two people yelling, crying, leaving, returning, fighting, kissing, breaking, and healing again. This is the narrative you grew up breathing. A story where love means losing yourself in another person, where "you complete me" is considered romantic, even though it implies that, alone, you are incomplete. And then came social media, a stage where emotional suffering is dressed in aesthetics, where toxicity is turned into quotes, where obsession is glamorized as devotion, where jealousy is framed as passion, and where people mistake emotional wounds for soul connections. You scroll and see couples breaking up and getting back together as if love were a battlefield. You see videos saying, "Real love is hard," as if difficulty itself were the proof that something is meaningful. But what this really teaches you is to tolerate pain as love. You learn to stay when you are anxious. You learn to chase when you are abandoned. You learn to believe that the person who confuses you must be special, because why else would your body respond so strongly to them? And culture rewards this. Stories about heartbreak spread faster than stories about healing. Songs about longing chart higher than songs about peace. People talk more passionately about the one who got away than the one who stayed. We have built an entire romantic mythology around suffering, and we call it destiny. But the emotional cost of this mythology is enormous. Because when you believe love should feel like chaos, you begin to fear the quiet. When you believe love must be earned, you reject the person who gives it freely. When you are trained to chase love, you never learn how to receive it. And slowly, silently, something in you begins to break. Now, we must turn to the part of the story you rarely speak of, the private cost your heart has paid for loving this way. There comes a point where the heart begins to tire. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, in the background of your everyday life. You don't notice the moment it happens. You just wake up one day and feel heavier than before. You start asking questions in the silence of your own thoughts. Why wasn't I enough? Why does love always feel like waiting? Why does affection feel like something I have to earn? Loving someone who cannot love you in the way you need is not a single heartbreak. It is a repeated one. A slow erosion, a gradual thinning of who you are. You try to hold on, but in the process, you begin to loosen your grip on yourself. You shrink to fit the spaces they allow. You quiet your needs so you don't seem demanding. You pretend you don't care as much as you do, because caring has always cost you something. The mask grows heavier, and yet you still wear it, hoping they might finally see you if you try just a little harder. You start living in emotional limbo, never fully chosen, but never fully let go. It feels like standing at the edge of a doorway, waiting for someone to return to you with their full presence, even though they've only ever given you fragments, and you learn to survive on those fragments. You convince yourself, crumbs are meals, that intensity is intimacy, that longing is love. This is where identity begins to dissolve. You forget what you desired before them. You forget what joy felt like when it was yours alone, unconnected to someone's approval or attention. You live in cycles of anxiety, waiting for a message, watching for subtle shifts in tone, replaying conversations in your mind, trying to decode meaning where there is only absence. Your nervous system stays in a state of alertness, a relentless readiness to either be abandoned or temporarily reassured. And yet, the thought of leaving feels impossible, because the pain has become intertwined with the hope the withdrawal has become as addictive as the high. The love you feel is real, but the relationship it's attached to is not nourishing you, it is draining you. So you begin to grieve a love that is still alive. You mourn while still holding their hand. You cry without tears, inside places no one sees. This is the loneliness that comes from being emotionally connected to someone who is not emotionally available. But even here, there is something quietly sacred, because if the heart can break, it means the heart is still awake, and there is another way to love one that doesn't require you to disappear. So how do you unlearn a love that felt like destiny? How do you walk away from the familiar pull of longing when your body believes that longing is love? Healing does not begin with forgetting the person. It begins with remembering yourself. The first step is awareness, noticing the pattern instead of blindly falling into it. You begin to observe your reactions like someone watching a quiet movie. The tightening in your chest when someone pulls away, the rush of adrenaline when they return, the small, anxious hope that you try to call devotion. You start to see how your nervous system is responding to the past, not the present. This awareness is not judgment. It is simply recognition, a gentle turning toward the truth. There is a child inside you, the same one who once waited for love. They learned to chase affection, to prove worth, to stay quiet so they wouldn't lose someone they needed. They learned that love is something uncertain. Healing asks you to sit with that child, to let them speak, to let them cry, to let them finally be held by the one person who will never abandon them, you. This is where nervous system healing begins. Instead of running toward the familiar fire of intensity, you learn to stay in the soft, quiet spaces of calm. At first, peace will feel strange. It will feel empty, boring, even wrong, because your body has been addicted to emotional spikes. But slowly, gently, you learn to tolerate safety, to breathe inside stillness, to recognize that love does not need to hurt to feel real. You begin choosing differently, not suddenly, not dramatically, but consistently. You pause before you chase. You listen to the ache instead of obeying it. You choose people who show up, people who stay, people who do not ask you to shrink to fit their love. This is how attraction rewires. Not through force, but through presence. Through teaching your heart that it no team longer has to reenact old stories. That love can be a home, not a battlefield. That connection can feel like exhaling, not holding your breath. And when you begin to trust your own worth, not because someone else validates it, but because you recognize it within yourself, something shifts. The old pattern loosens. The familiar pain loses its shine. And you no longer mistake chaos for love, because real love begins the moment you realize you do not have to chase it. Now, the question becomes something deeper, something timeless. If love doesn't require losing yourself, then what does it mean to truly love at all? There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when you realize the story you've been living does not have to continue. A moment when you notice that the love you once chased no longer holds the same spell. It is not that the memory disappears or that the longing vanishes entirely. It is that something inside you softens, something begins to understand. You were never incomplete. You were never waiting to be finished by another human being. You were waiting to remember yourself. You were taught that love must shake you, overwhelm you, break you open. You were shown that love is fire, dangerous, consuming, impossible to touch without burning. But perhaps love is not a flame. Perhaps it is a quiet light, a gentle warmth, a sunrise instead of a wildfire. You begin to see that the people who set your heart on fire were not proof of destiny, they were proof of memory. They resembled the emotional imprint of your earliest attachments. They felt familiar, and because familiar pain once felt like love, you mistook longing for depth and yearning for connection. But now you stand differently. The ache is still there, yes, but you are no longer kneeling before it. You are observing it. You are breathing through it. You are learning to ask a new question, one far more sacred than, why didn't they choose me? The question becomes, do I choose myself now? Healing is not loud. It does not look like triumph or dramatic release. It looks like small decisions. It looks like staying when everything in you wants to chase. It looks like choosing someone who is gentle, even if their gentleness feels unfamiliar at first. It looks like letting love be kind, letting love be steady, letting love be soft. You do not need a person who completes you. You are already whole. And one day, quietly, without fanfare, you will meet someone who does not awaken your wounds, but your peace. Someone whose presence feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Someone who does not trigger your nervous system into survival mode, because safety is their nature, not a performance. And you will realize something profound, something that rewrites your understanding of love entirely. You were not drawn to the person who was right. You were drawn to the person who felt familiar until you learned that peace can feel like love too.